2 cop cars showed up, and then 2 other cars, and then we were like, "Well, what's going down, in the street this afternoon?" And then they went into our place. And next minute, me and my brother were rushed into this car, and my parents were cuffed, and then they were going through our property. How could God do this to good Christian people who have never done anything wrong? And I couldn't work that out in my head, Well, if God's going to do this to people, then I don't want nothing to do with him, and I'm going to go and experience the world. And that's why I remember waking up, and this is the first thing I can remember from that accident, is waking up and looking at the roof of that machine thinking, it's over. My life's done, And I just knew that it was serious. And I said to him, I looked at him and I'll never forget it. I said, I've just wasted 15 years of my life. And there's a God out there that cares about me. Because it was in that moment, it was like I could hear God saying, I know where you are, I know where you've been, and I care about you. I actually grew up in the church that we're sitting in. So both my parents were Adventists, and we did all the normal things like Pathfinders and all the church things, come to Sabbath school every week, enjoyed church as a child. And then when I hit the age of just going into high school, my family actually went through something that I wouldn't wish upon anyone. So my sister didn't really get along with my parents. And when she left home, she decided to go and tell some stories to some people. And then next minute, me and my brother were playing one afternoon outside of our house, and 2 cop cars showed up, and then 2 other cars, and then we were like, "Well, what's going down, in the street this afternoon?" And then they went into our place. And next minute, me and my brother were rushed into this car, and my parents were cuffed, and then they were going through our property. And then we watched as our parents walked from the house into a police car and then just disappeared, And we were like, what's going on, And so it turned out that my parents had some allegations against them, which weren't true. And but we went into foster care, and we weren't allowed to see my parents for it was like the first 6 or so months. But then after that, we're allowed visitation, so access into the park. And then eventually we were allowed to come to church, but someone would come with us and they would sit in between me and my parents in this very church that we're in today. And so for me as a young man going into high school, you're in a time of your life where you're questioning things, right, anyway. And I was like, how could God do this to good Christian people who have never done anything wrong? And I couldn't work that out in my head, I know now that God never caused that, but back then I didn't know. So by the time my parents had won the court battle and we went back, which was like over 12 months, we went back to live with my parents, but my faith was out the window, because we went into a home that didn't practice faith, didn't, had nothing to do with God. And so I wanted to go and experience the world then, Well, if God's going to do this to people, then I don't want nothing to do with him, and I'm going to go and experience the world. So that's what I did. So I used to love BMX riding, so I spent all my days at the skate park mucking around on my bike. And then I got into like drinking and smoking, and then I actually got to a stage on my bike where I was starting to perform really well, So I started hanging around with some people that rode and travelled, and I got into the scene of BMX. So with that scene came parties and drugs and more alcohol and stuff like that. And it was in 2007 actually that we went to the Royal Sydney Easter Show, to do to perform in front of the crowd. And it was raining that year at Homebush, so the skate park was wet, so they'd called the show. And we went back to Newcastle, where we were staying, and we went down to just this little local skate park that was near where we were staying. And it seems to be when you get to a level of that in BMX, you're just like, well, I don't need a helmet and I don't need that stuff because I'm not going to fall and I'm not going to, you get this mentality where you think you're invincible. And we got on the beers and we went down to this little local skate park, and I went up off this jump, and I would have been probably 10 or more foot up, and then it just went wrong in the air. And I came down and I pin dropped on my head, and I fractured my skull in two places, so here and here, all the way through, and like split my skull apart. I had a bleed on the brain, and I'd done some damage to my leg, and I woke up in an MRI machine on a spinal trolley. And that's why I remember waking up, and this is the first thing I can remember from that accident, is waking up and looking at the roof of that machine thinking, it's over. My life's done, And I just knew that it was serious. And so I then went from, when I got out of hospital, I was in high dependency for like a week. And then they took me through rehabilitation and stuff, and I was in a wheelchair for a long time. I went from the wheelchair to like a wheelie walker to learn how to walk again. And by that stage, I was ready to go home, and but under constant supervision with I lived with a girl at the time, and through that time, like I would even get lost in the house, like my brain was that mixed up from the accident and that, and yeah, so that was a long journey to recovery. And by the time I'd recovered that, it was like close to 2009 then, so it was like a good 2 years. And then, so the doctors are telling me, this is really bad, you're lucky that you even lived, all the rest of it. And I'm just like, oh, well, I'll just party hard, So that's what I did. And then we were out full driving one day out the bush here in Grafton in 2009, and the boys were inside the car and I was outside the car. So I was hanging off the back of the car, and I had a can of rum in one hand and a smoke in the other, and next minute we went over a bump on the track and I went off the back of the car and I smashed my head again on this rock. And the boys thought I was dead. So I just hit the ground, I didn't move. Like I'd already had significant brain injuries from the first accident. And and one of the guys who actually comes to church now, he'll tell you, hey, that we were pinching me, thinking he's dead, What are we going to do with his body, right? so they're freaking out. They don't call the ambulance or nothing because we're all drunk and we're all, everyone's panicking. And they get me back to the house and they decide, well, we better call someone, And ambulance comes and picks me up, and it turns out that I am still alive. And so into hospital again I go again, and go down the whole road again of rehabilitation and all that stuff, and learning to walk again, and like I was a mess, And by that stage, the doctors were telling me, you're very fortunate that you're even alive. And they were saying, you need to, I don't know what's going to happen in your life, if your life keeps going down this road, then it's not looking good. So come 2012, I was somewhat recovered, and I was starting to do a little bit of part-time work again. And one night we were down, I decided I was going to get back on the bike, and we went down to the Bunnings car park here in Grafton, and we used to go around the back and flog all the pallets and build stuff and just muck around and on our bikes. And one night we were down there, and I came up and I went down, and I had a helmet on this time actually, but I'd hit the ground again on my head, and this time I went into convulsions and fits. So I was having like what they call a grand mal seizure. So I went from there to hospital, airlifted to Sydney to the Prince of Wales Hospital, and now I was in a real situation because I'd just gained a third brain injury plus severe epilepsy. So the epilepsy that I had was the what they called uncontrollable. So I was having like 3 or 4, maybe even more than 4 fits a day, And this is unconsciousness, incontinence, and when you'd wake up from those fits and you'd be totally, it's not like you could just wake up and walk around, you'd be done, Yeah, for like, sometimes I'd end up in hospital. The local ambulance, I got introduced to the local ambulance station so they'd know who I was. And so they knew what they were coming to when they got the call to say that Greg's had a fit. And for months after that, I was going down to the Prince of Wales to have my head checked, they'd play with medication because nothing was working. Nothing they did was working, And to me, by that stage, I wasn't really interested if it was going to work or not, Like I'd had enough of life by that stage. I was giving up, because I'd spent times before this, in mental institutions and trying to kill myself and all this because of all these things that were happening in my life, and I just couldn't deal with it, And I'd always come out. I'd never be rehabilitated. I'd just go straight back to the drugs and the alcohol. And when it got to that stage, they were like, you've got some serious problems now, and if we can't control this, then you've got about 2 years. We'll give you 2 years to live. And so I just, in most people, well, you would think you would be like, well, I need to do something about my life, right? But I went the opposite. I was just like, well, if I've got 2 years, I'm going to go out with a bang, And so then I just hit the drugs and the alcohol as hard as I could. And that's when I got onto really, really hard drugs. I got into ice and all that stuff, and just tried to write myself off, basically. Anyway, through that time, I met another girl, and we'd brought a child into the world, and things obviously didn't work out there because both of our lives were in a bit of a mess. Mine more so than hers, but she ended up leaving with the child. And then I was in a stage of my life where I'd lost my child, I'd lost my life, I couldn't work, I couldn't drive, I couldn't do anything, And I was in that point in my life when I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, And previous to this, my father used to send pastors to see me and people like that, and I'd always be like, oh yeah, here's another person I'm going to tell me how good the Bible is and how good God is for your life, and I'd just write them off, and I'd always make sure I was drunk or whatever so I could have a real good time with them, I met this one guy, and when he came into my life, he just shared with me about his life, and he was sharing with me about the life that he'd had, and he never brought up the Bible, he never brought up God, he just took the time to befriend me, to be my friend, to care for me, and then eventually that grew into, we had a relationship, and that grew into him asking me, would you like to come and have Bible studies? And I'm in a situation where I'm in two minds. I'm in like, well, what can I lose? And also, here's another pastor that I can just have some fun with, So I go down to the boys' place that night, and we get loaded up. They load me up. So I get as drunk as I can. I get as high as I can. And I go, I'm going to meet this guy. I'll come back and tell you about it later. And I go to my parents' place, and I sit in my lounge room and my parents, and he opens up the Bible. And it's really simple. We're just going through Genesis. And he's talking about how God spoke and things came into existence, about how the world was created. And it was in that moment that the Holy Spirit hit me in the face like a brick. My head went down in my lap, and as I was contemplating this, I looked back up, and before I could even have a go at the guy about how full of crap the Bible was, I started crying. And the life that I was living in, you didn't cry in front of men. You didn't cry in front of people. And I was bawling my eyes out. And I said to him, I looked at him, and I'll never forget it. I said, I've just wasted 15 years of my life. And there's a God out there that cares about me. Because it was in that moment, it was like I could hear God saying, I know where you are. I know where you've been. and I care about you. And so I left my parents' house that day, and I didn't go back out to my mate's place. I was going to go out and tell them how I was going to, give this guy a rev up, but I went back to where I was staying. I went to my brother's place, and I was really chewing on this, And the next day, he gets up and goes to work, and I've got the coffee table and the stuff, everything's sitting there, and I just go like this. I push it all away. I push all those drugs, all that stuff away. And then I go for a walk up to the headland. I used to go fishing there every morning, and I fell down at my knees on the first step of the headland. And I just said, Lord, if you're really out there, you really do exist and you really do care about me, then my life needs to change. Because I've been to rehab, I've been to this, I've been to that, and nothing's worked. Nothing is working. I'm just getting worse. And I went for a fish, and I came home, and then it wasn't long after that I started to attend some prophecy seminars that this pastor who had come to see me was telling me about that he was running. And I was pretty fried, so not a lot of it was going in. But I was really feeling this sense that God did care about me. And I was willing to give that a go, and so I started praying. And I was like, Lord, if you really want me to do something with my life, if you really have a purpose for me, then how can I do that when I'm going to die? I've got no life, I've got nothing, how can I do that? I need a life, I need my life back to do that. And it wasn't long after that I went down for my next appointment to the Prince of Wales Hospital, and they hooked me up to the machines, to the electrode tests that they do for epilepsy to see how it's going. I have an MRI scan. I have all the stuff done, and I'm sitting there at the end of the day and I'm waiting in the waiting room. And normally the doctor comes out and they're like, oh, well, we've got to work on this, we've got to change this, and we've got to do this because things still aren't looking good. But this time the professor comes out and she goes, it's gone. And I said, what do you mean it's gone? And she goes, the MRI scan is clear. The electrode tests are showing that there's no epilepsy anymore. And it's miraculous and we can't explain it. And I knew, I knew what had happened because I'd had this encounter with God and I was like, God's done that. Not that she wanted to hear that, but I knew. And she said, if it continues to go like this, then you'll get your license back. You'll be able to work again and you'll live a normal life. And so from that day till now, I've never had a fit. I've never had anything happen with my brain. I drive a car, I'm here and I'm doing all the things that a normal person would do. When I got back from that, there was only one thing that I wanted to do. And I wanted to serve Jesus with all my heart. I wanted to tell people about a God that could do that for them. Because if he could do it for me, then he could do it for them. So I came back and I started attending church. I got baptised, and then it wasn't long after my baptism that I just decided to go and do Bible working out in the community, like for nothing, volunteering, just go and share God with other people, because that's where my passion was. I wanted to tell the whole world about Jesus and what he'd done for my life. And through that process, that I was starting to connect with people, and I was really loving it. And the local church, they employed me then as a Bible worker. Then the conference ended up employing me as a Bible worker. And then I was doing a morning devotion for the conference office staff one morning. And the president said, I want to see you after this. And so after I presented the devotion, I saw the president and he said, where do you see your ministry going, And I said, wherever God wants it to. And he goes, I believe you've been called to pastoral ministry. So by this stage, I'd actually gained custody back of my daughter that I'd lost, because my life went in the right direction and her mum's life, unfortunately, continued down the path. And so I said, I just can't pack up and go to Avondale for 4 years. I've got to look after this kid. So he said, what if I could organise it, distance ed? And I was still like trying to get out of it, sort of. I was like, I love telling people about Jesus, but that's a big responsibility, you know. So I'm like, I think I can afford it. And he goes, what if it won't cost you anything? So like that was, to me, and praying on that was like a sign from God. And so I went into ministry, and the experiences that I led in life led to the way that my ministry runs today. You know, it led me to look at people differently, to view people differently. You know, as a society, we have this mentality where we look at people that are in the gutter with a needle in their arm, or we look at the prostitute, or we look at, and we're just like, that person doesn't deserve the time of day, you know. But if God didn't view me like that, then I wouldn't be where I am today. You know, so that they're the people that I love to help. You know, not that I don't like to help other people, because I love to help all people, but they're my passion. You know, and that's really shaped the ministry that I've had today. So they're the areas that I like to focus on, the people that people don't have the time of day for. You know, because there were times in my journey where I'd get a visit from a church member, and they'd go and tell my dad, that guy's lost forever, you know. Yeah. But no one's lost forever, you know. Yeah. Yeah, so it really shapes what I do now in my ministry. I feel like I probably, as a pastor now, I probably don't spend enough time behind the desk, and I probably don't spend enough time doing paperwork and stuff like that. And I'm really fortunate to be in a church where there's a lot of people who will take on that administrative stuff, because I like being out there and I love connecting with people, and I love telling people that their lives can change too. So when I was going through all that stuff, I got real fixated on death when they told me I was going to die, you know. And so all over my arms and my body, like it's pretty much everywhere to my knees, is just covered in skulls. And I even have 2 traditional death roses on each shoulder, and that was to symbolise the 2 years that I had to live. And my goal, I should say, I wanted to be fully suited in tattoos when they buried me in my coffin, you know. So that's the story behind the tattoos, but God has other plans. So at the moment, we have a food hub that runs from the church, where we do up food parcels for people, and we run a food van for the homeless. So we dish out soup to the homeless on a Tuesday evening downtown, and just sit there. You have a table set up, and you dish them out some soup, and just connect with them. You know, just talk to them about how they're doing in life and where they've been. And yeah, we run morning tea called High Teas over at a cafe in town, and that's for the ladies. So anyone from the community who's a lady can just go to that and just enjoy a morning tea with some games and some friendship. Yeah, we run community dinners once a month. So that's just a free meal for anyone in the community. Doesn't matter who you are, rich, poor, doesn't matter. Just come and have a free meal. There's no spiritual content. We're just sharing a meal and a laugh together. And every second one of those, we run a trivia night. So we have trivia, and people love trivia. Hey, I didn't realise how popular it was. And people come, and we have the meal, and then we have dessert, and then we start some trivia, and there'll be like a topic on each of those nights. We run fishing days, so taking people down to one of the local beaches that's close by, and the church provides the lunch and the bait. And fishing's a bit of a hobby of mine, so just walk around and fish the mouth of the river together or whatever, and just chat about stuff. And they run like Mother's Day programs and stuff, like Pamper Days and things like that. And our biggest thing, but at the moment, I would say, would be our skate park community event. And this was, I guess, close to my heart because that's from where my life came from. And if you spend any time at any skate park, there's a lot of kids down there doing things that they shouldn't be doing and just thinking that that's the way life's supposed to be, and they don't realise their full potential. And so that's what the drive was behind that, was to try and get these kids to see that there's more to life than just hanging out at the skate park and sucking on a vape or a bong or whatever, And so every school holidays now we run a community event down at the skate park, and it's family orientated, so anyone can, it's for all ages. So for the more serious guys, we run 2 heats during the day. They get 60 seconds to do their stuff on the park, and then they get a score out of that from 3 judges. And then for the little ones that can't do that stuff, we have games throughout the day. So there'll be like a limbo, who can get under the bar the lowest on their bike or their skateboard or their scooter, or who can jump over the bar the highest, or who can jump the furthest in a line, or things like that, So games like that for the kids, so they can all get involved, and then you're just connecting with the community while you're doing that. You're just showing them that church life isn't all just boring, and we're just normal people who like to do normal things, and it's been great doing that because the community's really got behind us. That when we first started running, they were really blown away that a church would actually take the time to do that. And now, like, we get lots of support from local businesses. The people from community show up to watch the event, and they're right behind it on social media, and they see the benefits in it, because now we have these events, and on the days that we have these events, there's no trouble at the park. There's no arguments, there's no fights, there's no one doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Whereas it's not always like that at the skate park. It brings people, it's bringing the community together instead of giving a bad name to certain people in the community. It's been such a great event to have. Yeah, I think the secret to a good community event is, one, find out what the community needs and target that. Because if you're just running an event in the community that no one's interested in, what's the point, And 2, just show the people that you care. You're just showing the people that you care. We're not here to get you in this building. We're here because we care about you and what you need, and befriending them. And I know, like, everyone says this, Christ methods alone, but you got to win their trust. You got to win their trust. And sometimes we don't spend enough time doing that, but it does pay off, because people come to me from that event, and like, we're studying with them now, and we're doing things with them now. And it's only because they see that you care. That's our, when we're down there on the day, we don't have a heap of stuff handing it out and doing that stuff. It's just for them. It's just for them. And guess what? When you make it just for them, they'll see that, because it's not about you, it's about them, and they'll come and see you after. They'll come and talk to you after, and they'll go, hey, I've got a problem with, I had a guy come to me from one of these events, and he came up to the church one day. It was just lucky that I was here. And he goes, I need to talk to you because I've got a problem with alcohol and it's ruining my family, And he came to me. I didn't have to go to him, because you're showing the community that you care. So we're showing the community that we are a community who cares about our community. One thing I'd like to say is, don't be afraid to try things, When I first took the skate comp idea to the board, you can imagine what some thoughts were, What about the insurance? What about this? But, I think that shows a lack of our faith. And God will bless you no matter what you do, but you have to step out in faith. So don't be scared to try things that are outside the box, you know, because this world, people are living in that situation now. They're living outside the box, you know, and we've got to meet them outside the box. So yeah, they're not expecting someone from a church to take them fishing. They're not expecting them to take them out to a cafe. They're not expecting them to run a skate comp, or, you know, it could be a touch football event, or, you know, an obstacle event or something like that. You know, we had a youth event here one night where we set up black plastic and just had big water slides, and people didn't expect that, you know, because it's outside the box. They were expecting to come in and listen to a thing on the PowerPoint screen and then have a meal and go home, you know. But by showing them we're just regular people like they are, and they gel with that, they connect with that, you know, and then they'll want to know, oh, how come you don't drink? How come you don't do this? How come, you know? And you will get those opportunities. But first of all, you got to show them that you care about them. My advice is go and connect with someone. It's scary at the start because you think, how can God just take away all my problems? You know, how can he help with all of that? But man, I can't explain enough how much God helped me in my situation. And like, I tried it all. I went to this program, I did that program, I talked to this person, you know, some of the best doctors in the world, they couldn't fix me. But God fixed me, you know, through a relationship with him. So I know that it can be scary, and it's scary the first time you walk in the church, and it can be scary approaching someone, and it can almost, you know, seem too unbelievable. How can this person that I can't even see fix my life, you know? But what have you got to lose? What have you got to lose? And if you've got nothing to lose, which you don't, then give it a go. And my bet is that God will change your life too. Yeah, I'd just like to say how thankful I am to be in the position I am, where I can just share about the one person who cared about me more than anyone else. You know, and but you don't have to be a pastor to do that. You don't have to be a Bible worker to do that. You don't even have to be a member of a church. If you've had an experience with God, you can share that with anyone. And people can't argue with your story because it's your story. So don't be scared to share Christ, because the more that we share him, the sooner we'll go home.